It's taken me 9 years to read Star Wars Lost Stars by Claudia Gray, and then 10 years to actually, more like 9.5 actually, to actually get my review out of it. I will say, it didn't actually take me 10 years-ish. These numbers are big to read it. It only took me about a day, but yeah, I got busy and I forgot where I put my notes for it, so now we're getting to it. So yes, overall, I thought this was a really good book. I enjoyed a lot of the parallels it had to other Star Wars books. Some of it that haven't came out yet when the book was written back in, I should say released in September 2015. Others were clearly designed to connect up to it, because for context, as you can see, well, maybe not in the book I have here, but it says Journey to Star Wars The Force Awakens. This book was written to intentionally lead into The Force Awakens, and thus there are connections to it. The very last chapter reflects that. It alludes to the Imperial Remnant becoming the First Order. But like I alluded to already, there are connections both in terms of Easter eggs and also in thematic elements that connect Lost Stars to other properties, other stories in Star Wars. So initially I was going to be dividing this into 3 parts: a character recap, a plot summary, and then connections. It's going to be a little more jumbled. Because I already have this fully written, I'll still be doing my recap of the characters. My plot summary is going to end about maybe a third of the way through the book, and then I'm just going to go off script, and then connections. Yeah, I don't have that written down, so I'll just kind of muddle through that. I could have taken the time to reread the book and finish polishing off what I'm going to say. Nah, I'm not going to do that. That's effort. So let's begin with talking about our 2 main characters. And those characters are Thane Kyrell and Ciena Ree. They're both from the planet Jelucan, which is a backwater outer rim planet. Thane is descended from a second wave of settlers to the planet who are known as the Second Wavers. How original. It's almost like they were named by historians. And they settled on Jelucan looking for economic and trade opportunities. His family is considered pretty well off, but they do abuse him both mentally and physically. And his brothers definitely treat him as the golden boy, but unlike San, his brother does not do well in the Imperial Academy. Basically, not quite washes out, but washes out. San is also a cynic, and he's distrustful of most, if not all, authority figures. Kind of obvious, when you're abused by your parents, I think it makes sense that you become distrustful of authority figures. This also means that later in the book, spoilers I should say, when he decides to desert from the Empire following the destruction of Alderaan and witnessing slavery firsthand and the abuse and horrors of it, it didn't take him much to convince to defect from the Empire to desert. Now, it did take him a little more convincing to join the rebellion, but he does when he, coincidentally, it's Wedge and Taste, who's also an Imperial defector. Man, it's amazing how often that happens in the current canon. Though really, we did not know that about Wedge yet when this story was written. But anyhow, he's on the planet because he eventually got some work on a freighter, and they were helping the planet that was, basically because of the Empire. And the rebels they're also helping humanitarian aid, not military aid, humanitarian aid. And that's what convinced him that the rebels might have something going for them. And he initially mostly joins it because he doesn't like the Empire. But by the end of the book, he's in on the rebellion and restoring the Republic and creating a fairer galaxy that's more just. Now we're going to talk about Ciena Ree. She is descended from the first wave of settlers on Jelucan, who are called the Valley Kindred. So, according to the lore, they came to Jelucan following a civil war on the original home planet, and her people were the people that were loyal to the king, and they were defeated, so they chose exile. The Valley Kindred live a very nomadic lifestyle, and they follow traditional beliefs, including the Force. And not just traditional beliefs, they're also traditionalists in general, very much following cultural practices and cultural rites. And part of her culture is an absolute honoring of an oath. Even if the other person does not honor it, the other side decides to forsake it, you do not. That's how strict this honor code, if you will, is. And this actually means that she stays loyal to the Emperor, even though she sees the problems with the Empire. She's like, well, I made an oath, I must uphold it. And this also causes a rift between her and Thane as well. I would also like to mention that Ciena had a twin who died young, like pretty much at birth, and she wears a bracelet in remembrance of her twin. But if I remember correctly, there's a point in the story where she loses it. Like all throughout the academy, she was able to keep it, but it was like after the Battle of Endor, because she got injured in that battle, she loses her bracelet that remembers her sister. Yeah, I should have written more of this stuff down. But let's talk about the two characters together. Thane and Ciena, they're childhood friends, and they bond over the mutual love of flying, and they together decide to join the Empire following an encounter with Grand Moff Tarkin. Before I talk about that, I do want to address that their families and their peoples are not a big fan of them hanging out because they're from different groups. So a little bit of a Romeo and Juliet situation going on, and yes, they do eventually fall in love. But of course, they keep on getting dragged apart. First, you had the Empire trying to force a divide between them and basically abusing, for lack of a term, Ciena's culture. That helps contribute to the divide, and also divide against when Thane decides to leave the Empire in general. Though the story does end where Ciena is captured by the New Republic. Thane thinks that because there's so many Imperial that somebody like Ciena, who was not a major leader, not anybody of note, will probably just basically a slap on the wrist, and then they can work together to reconcile and move forward as at least friends, if not more. But that's at the end of the story. But I do want to mention that their encounter with Grand Moff Tarkin was shortly after they met each other. Ciena was actually being picked on by some other second wavers, and Thane sided with her in the fight, standing up for her. And they were also the only ones who didn't run when Grand Moff Tarkin showed up. By the way, they were all sneaking a look at Grand Moff Tarkin's shuttle, by the way. All these kids, that's what was going on there. And then Tarkin decided to show them around the shuttle and convince them that they wanted to join the Empire. That is so disgusting. Well, definitely not. Another thing, Tarkin basically groomed them. He made them think that they wanted to join the Empire, when all they really wanted to do was see a cool ship and fly. Tarkin put the idea of joining the Empire in their head, something they had not considered organically, and made them not only put the idea in their head, but made them think that they wanted to join the Empire. Disgusting, Tarkin, disgusting. Though I am glad how the book does mention that Tarkin's Star Destroyer once got destroyed at the end of Star Wars Rebels. Not directly, but it is mentioned. I'm glad they did that. I'm going to talk about the rest of the story in the plot summary. I'll try. I scripted that then, but what I'm saying now, I did not end up scripting, and I had not finished my plot summary when I decided to record this. But going back to what I'm saying is, the plot of the story is about their relationship, their stories intertwined. And basically that story is one of close friends falling in love, but also being divided over differing loyalties. But before I go over what I did script about the plot itself, let me talk about some of the other important major characters in the book, which are mostly their roommates at the Imperial Academy. So we're going to begin with Ciena's two roommates. The first is Kendor Idel of Alo, which is a tropical world, and Jude Edivan of Bespin. Jude, she looks at everything from a scientific and analytical perspective. In fact, during A New Hope, when an officer mentions to Tarkin that they found out there was a flaw in the Death Star, the analyst who that officer was talking about happened to have been Jude. Kendor, on the other hand, she's much more in touch with her homeworld's culture, very much like Ciena in that regard. And Kendi refuses to cut her hair, so she has to braid it to stay within uniform regulations at the Academy and in the Empire. And kind of because of her being more in touch with her culture, which, while more like Ciena, that, like Thane, leads her to decide to defect to the Rebel Alliance. In fact, she and her entire unit decide to defect from the Empire, join the Rebels. From what I can tell, this is sometime after the Battle of Hoth, but before the Battle of Endor. And Kennedy and Thane, who were friends at the Academy because they had a mutual friend in Ciena, get reunited. I also would like to say that I don't know why, but I feel like Jude, she would have eventually defected too if she had not died on board the first Death Star and had found out a second one was being built. I don't know why, but I feel like that would have been that would have pushed her nope, not gonna do it anymore. I could be totally wrong, but I could see her looking I could see her thinking, why would I support a group that makes the same mistake again? I could see her in an analytical way of doing that, rather than out of any moral sense. But that's just a random speculation on my part that I have no basis for actually supporting. Well, maybe a little bit, but not enough to call it solid. And now I want to talk about the two roommates of Thane at the Academy. Nash Windrider of Alderaan and Ved Fossil of Coruscant. And despite being extremely shaken by the destruction of his home planet, Nash ultimately decides to double down and stay loyal to the Empire. And he survives, he stays loyal to the Empire through the Battle of Jakku, and we assume joins the First Order. And Ved, kind of same thing as well, though we don't see much of him after they graduate the Academy, but at the very end of the book, it's shown that he became a weapons developer and he stayed loyal. And like I said, both are implied to have become part of the First Order. I also want to mention that there's another character whose name I forgot to write down, but becomes Ciena's friend after the destruction of Alderaan. A new friend, kind almost in a way to replace Jude as one of her closest friends, and definitely in terms of how her role in the story in some regards in relationship to Ciena. But that's more of a minor thing, and she stays loyal to the Empire too, if I remember correctly. But now, let's move on to the plot summary. As I alluded to earlier, as I stated outright earlier, Lost Stars follows the stories of Thane and Ciena, from childhood friends to falling in love, and how their paths diverge after the events of A New Hope. Together, as kids, despite the objections of the parents, they hung out, practiced flying, studied for the Imperial Academy and the preparatory courses and exams. I also would like to mention that they helped support each other in their own weaknesses during those study things to make them more appealing candidates, and they were selected for what's considered the most prestigious Imperial Academy, the Royal Academy on Coruscant. At the Academy, they meet their roommates and new friends. They consistently performed at the top of their classes, and they grew closer. At one point in the Academy, they are competing in a speeder race for a class, and their speeder bikes accidentally get entangled, and they did successfully complete the race in first, but they only get half of the amount of bonus points each instead of the full amount, because that was not supposed to happen, and the Empire doesn't reward creativity quite like that. The dance structure definitely gave them a little bit of creativity. But not too long after that, probably because of that very instant, the Academy purposely sets out to sabotage them and put them at odds from each other. Thane is led to believe that Ciena sabotaged his project, while Ciena is led to believe that Thane framed her for sabotaging his project. Though they do figure this out, but the falling out did not come because they blamed each other, but because they disagreed on the course of action about what to do. Ciena basically was like, the Academy knows what they're doing, it's a test, blah blah blah, basically defending the Empire, saying this is wrong, it should be called out. So this turns what used to be a friendly and supportive rivalry into a true rivalry. So during the remaining 3 years at the Academy, they did drift apart. By the same time, they started developing their romantic feelings for each other. Because there is a saying, fondness makes the heart grow close, and I think missing the other made them realize how much the other one meant to each other. But by the time of graduation, they reconcile. They graduate at the top of the class, and they even get invited to a ball at the Imperial Palace, alongside Jude and Ved as well. By the way, the Imperial Palace, which they allude to used to be some type of temple, and then we do know it used to be the Jedi Temple thanks to later works in Star Wars. And like I said, it's at the ball itself actually, not just during graduation, but at the ball where they reconcile and they unspokenly acknowledge their mutual romantic feelings for each other. This is also when Ciena reveals to Thane that she keeps a bracelet in remembrance of her dead twin in her pocket since she can't wear it anymore. So she did still keep it around, not quite on her body, but still on her person. And that's where I ended writing my plot summary. But don't worry, I refreshed my memory, so I'm going to ad-lib everything from here on in. So after graduation, they get their postings. Thane ends up on the Death Star while Ciena ends up on the Devastator. So you're going to be telling, they're going to be close to the action. And they are. Though Thane is thankfully off the Death Star when it is destroyed because he's part of the detachment that was sent to investigate Thane Kyrell and the rebel base there, which also shows him that the rebels are not a pushover. And while Ciena is on the Devastator at the time, so she's not on the Death Star, she thinks both Jude and Thane were killed by the rebels, which further her resolve to support the Empire despite the destruction of Alderaan. But thankfully, Thane does survive, so that does give Ciena a little bit, some comfort. But he's reassigned, and he ends up on a planet where he witnesses firsthand slavery by the hands of the Empire, and that convinces him to defect. But of course, both of them have a conversation with each other at one point, and they misunderstand each other. So basically, they both think they are in full agreement with or not. Ciena thinks that they're going to stay loyal to the Empire, that's the right course of action, that they're both in agreement on this. While Thane decides that they're both going to defect from the Empire, maybe not join the rebels, but at least leave the Empire. So he returns to the homeworld of Jelucan. And because, of everything going on after the destruction of the Death Star, shortage for officers, Ciena is given the task of basically finding Thane and bringing him back to the Empire because apparently they're so desperate, minor things like defections and that they're going to, or at least AWRs, they're going to overlook for the time being because apparently they're desperate for officers. So she finds him pretty easy on Jelucan, and okay, they get a bit spicy with each other and all that. While Thane does promise he's not going to join the rebels, so he does eventually change his mind on that. Ciena decides that she's going to tell him that she's going to report that to the Empire that he's defected, and tells him that he needs to get off of Jelucan so the Empire doesn't find him. So she is actually violating her oath to the Empire in this regard. But when she goes back to the planet, she violates her oath even more by telling the Empire that Thane died, that he basically took a Ridge Walker and in a depressed state of losing so many friends and all that, he ended up driving off the side of a cliff and dying. Very tragic though, and this actually somehow benefits Ciena later on, because later on in the story, her mother is accused of embezzlement, and the only one who actually shows up to support Ciena's mother besides Ciena is Thane, nobody else. And that seems to show how the Empire has totally destroyed the culture on Jelucan and all that. And Ciena's one of the few people still holding on to, especially the Valley Kindred's ways. But a lot of other Valley Kindred, they're all holding on to, because as a whole, the Empire is using their cultural traditions of honoring an oath against them to keep them trapped in the Imperial system, rather than breaking free and recognizing the tyranny and the problems of the Empire. Thane is supposed to be the contrast that follows this, where he doesn't have the same cultural commitment to honor, to holding to one's oath. He does in a way still have some of those same qualities, but he does not do so blindly. He defects from the Empire because he sees the Empire is not upholding their end, and they don't deserve to be, to get the same treatment out of him and Ciena. And while he does not reveal in that moment to Ciena that he joined the rebels, she does figure it out. They get spicy again, and they part ways once again. But pretty soon it's getting closer to the Battle of Endor, and Thane's squadron is sent to investigate some Imperial ships, and Ciena's squadron is sent to intercept Thane's squadron. But she's also given the orders to make sure at least one rebel pilot escapes. And when she finds out Thane is among the group, guess who she decides to let escape? Yeah. And actually, she does let most of the squadron escape except for one, though I think that her real focus was on letting Thane escape. And Thane's old roommate, Nash, is also there too. And he's mad, and he wants to kill Thane. Ciena stops him cleverly. And basically, Nash is so mad at Thane for basically pretending to die that he doesn't even question what Ciena was doing, thinking she was equally as mad. Meanwhile, she was actually knew Thane was alive, knew he had defected, and was purposely letting him live because the Empire told her to let somebody live. And she used that order to sneakily let Thane survive. Which, by the way, I don't remember if her other roommate, Kendi, was in that squadron or not as well. Which might have been a happy coincidence too. But another thing I want to kind of point out because of this scene is how both characters behave differently among their factions. Ciena keeps a lot of this personal stuff hidden. She does not tell friends, confide in them, even though she has some people she considers close friends. But because of the system she's in, and she recognizes that she'd get ratted out if she revealed that stuff, so she doesn't. Meanwhile, with the rebel, Thane, he's much more honest about things. He's much more open and all that. Partially because doesn't need to keep secrets. And kind of using his thing to their benefit kind of does happen as well to a certain extent. For example, when Ciena's mother was accused of embezzlement, the rebels were like, yeah, go ahead, just as long as you get back before the fleet jumps. Meanwhile, with the Empire, Ciena had to beg to be let to go to support her mother. And there was no benefit from that. Neither of them really benefited in terms of helping Ciena's mother, but the point being, Ciena, you would think, would be in a position to actually help her mother, but she's unable to because of the Imperial system. Eventually, Battle of Endor happens, fights and all that. We know what goes down there. Ciena, though, gets injured, and that's where she loses the bracelet of remembering her twin. I don't remember what happens to it, but that's, as I recall, as well, she lost it. She gets injured. She, though, is then put in charge of a Star Destroyer. The very Star Destroyer that we see in The Force Awakens, the Inflictor, which crashes because the rebels, both Thane and Kendi, by the way, so two people that Ciena know, are tasked with going on board, being the fact they used to fight with the Empire, so they know Imperial systems, to get on board to try to steal the ship. Partially to get more ships for the rebels, but we do know about Starhawks now. The Inflictor, if it had been successfully captured, would have been turned probably into a Starhawk for the New Republic. Of course, I do want to also state that Ciena, being smart, decides to self-destruct, but because the rebels destroyed the self-destruct, set the ship on the course to crash into Jakku. And that's actually where she's captured by the New Republic, by the rebels, by Thane, actually, who apprehends her. And that pretty much ends the story. Though, because they don't know that she's been captured, Nash and the other Imperial Remnant folks who she was friends with, who survived, think that she died fighting for the Empire. Just captured fighting for the Empire and all that. And so they decide that they're going to give her a posthumous reward that's very prestigious. And that's pretty much where the story ends. But like I said, it does allude at the end to the upcoming First Order. So, a lot going on in there. That's kind of my plot recap. You can definitely tell that I probably should have scripted it a bit more, but hey, gotta do what you gotta do. But like I said, connections are all over the place. I kind of mentioned a lot of the connections that would lead into The Force Awakens that was designed to, but there's also connections that has subsequently developed. Apparently there's a mention, I don't remember where, but a mention of Imperial defectors helping the rebels win on Naboo. Isn't that the Star Wars Battlefront 2 campaign? With Iden Versio and Del Miko? Like, that's what they did! Nice connection. How about connections with the Aftermath trilogy, because they're set at the same time? There's connections there. And there's also an Imperial defector in the Alphabet... Sorry. There's also an Imperial defector in the Aftermath trilogy as well. But Alphabet Squadron 2, Imperial defector, our main character there. Her name is blanking on my head for some reason, but kind of like Ciena, she's like the middle ground between Ciena and Thane in many regards. Like, both of them, she does see the problems of the Empire, but like Ciena, she needed a push to leave, and she was given a push and she accepted, but Ciena, while given multiple pushes by Thane to leave the Empire, never does. So it's quite interesting, those parallels there in characters, and even though many of these stories were written separately, years apart, that there was somebody who said, hey, this is an idea that we want to try to convey with Imperial defectors or characters who consider defecting. Make sure you try to incorporate these ideas somehow into your story, or a few of these ideas. I suspect things like that could be going on behind the scenes, but there's a lot of just fascinating stuff with those connections. I'm sure there's more. I've talked a lot, but overall, I did like Lost Stars. I just wish I scripted my review a little bit better, at least bullet pointed the parts I didn't script, so that way I could have been a little more polished. But hey, sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do to make sure you get the video out in time, and especially because your other videos are taking longer than you had hoped. Anyhow, I would love to hear your thoughts on Lost Stars by Claudia Gray in the comment section down below, and I hope to see you in the very next video. Thank you for watching my video. I do hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please be sure to give this video a like and share. Also, consider subscribing to my channel to stay up to date on all my latest content. In the meantime, thank you for watching, and as always, have a good day, a good night, wherever you are. May the Force be with you always.